Welcome to the Catholic Culture Podcast, dedicated to the Holy Family. I'm Thomas V. Miras. Today I'm speaking with the folk group Roundabout, whose new children's album, Singsong Pennywhistle, is intended to inspire families to begin singing together. Hey everybody, today I'm speaking with Emma and Cecilia Black. They are two sisters who grew up in a large family that sang together constantly, and now they've made an album of folk songs for children, which they made specifically for the purposes of inspiring families to start singing together. And they want people to know that anybody can start singing folk music today. You don't need any special training, you don't need any special equipment, you can just start doing it if you can carry a tune. Emma and Cecilia record under the name Roundabout, and their new album is called Singsong Pennywhistle. And in this interview, they discuss the ethos of folk music, which is about participation rather than consumption, as with pop music. We had a kind of amusing discussion of the lyrical content of folk music and kind of this misbegotten notion that some people have that folk is always kind of squeaky clean and wholesome and positive in its lyrical content. Of course, needless to say, their own album is entirely suitable for families with young children. They also talk about some of the problems with commercial children's music today, which is often kind of dumbed down musically and lyrically, and their own album is intended to be part of the solution to that problem. I really enjoyed talking to Emma and Cecilia. There was a lot more laughing than usual in this episode. And also you're going to hear several of the songs from their album. And just so you know what voice belongs to what sister in this interview, Cecilia has a little bit of a higher voice and Emma a little bit of a lower voice. And Cecilia is the one who talks more in this conversation. So I'll be cutting to some of their songs throughout the episode. I won't announce most of them, but this one that I'm opening with is called Mr. Rabbit from Singsong Pennywhistle.
Mr. Rabbit, your coat is mighty gray. Yes, bless God, it was made that way. Every little soul's gonna shine, shine. Every little soul's gonna shine along. Mr. Rabbit, your ears are mighty long. Yes, bless God, they was put on wrong. Every little soul's gonna shine, shine. Every little soul's gonna shine. Mr. Rabbit, your tail is mighty white. Yes, bless God, I'm a kitten on his side. Every little soul's gonna shine, shine. Every little soul's gonna shine along. Mr. Rabbit, you're looking mighty thin. Yes, bless God, I've been cutting through the wind. Every little soul's gonna shine, shine. Every little soul's gonna shine along. Every little soul's gonna shine, oh shine. Every little soul's gonna shine along.
Emma and Cecilia, welcome to the Catholic Culture Podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
So you are part of a overall musical family, correct?
Yes.
And you have been making music together as a family since childhood?
Yep. Since we're the fifth and the sixth kid of seven, respectively. And so literally before we were born, we were surrounded by music.
So, yeah, it's interesting because I'm a musician. I play piano. All of the members of my family, had to study music to some degree at some point in our childhood. But I think maybe the problem is that we all had to study piano, which isn't really conducive to, corporate music making.
Yes.
Not that we want to make corporate music, but you know what I mean. So, the only real sort of communal, let's call it, music making in my family was, Christmas caroling, essentially, and singing in church, of course, occasionally singing hymns, stuff like that. So what was the sort of like musical tradition that you were all involved in?
So, yeah, we also took a lot of piano, and I agree that it's not the most communal instrument in the world. There were lots of fights over who got to practice piano and when, but both of our parents sing a lot. And I think my mom kind of used it as a parenting tool a little bit. So we spent a lot of time in the car. Everybody's in the car, well, so-and-so took math lessons or whatever. We were homeschooled all in the extended van, and we would tend to fight in the seats of the van. And my mom didn't appreciate that. So she would try and distract us by either listening to music or more often singing. So we'd sing a lot of just really simple kind of rounds, campfire songs, a lot of music she remembered from when she was little. And so it just became something we did a lot whenever we were together. Mm-hmm. Doing the dishes also. That was another time.
Yeah, so she would just spend a lot of time singing to us in general or singing with us at bedtime as well. So we would have, she'd sing us lullabies, and we'd have a certain prayer song that we'd sing as a prayer at the end of our, prayers at the end of the night. So just really singing all the time.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Was she obviously she was a musical person in some sense, but it can, when you say, if I were to say you came from a family of folk musicians, would that be potentially misleading, or would it be closer to the mark to say that you just came from a family of folk?
Definitely a family of folk. Yeah. My mother would really want me to say that she is not a musician. She can't read a note of music. She doesn't know the difference between a treble and a bass clef. She's sung in choir. She sang in college choir, but always by ear. She would just learn the melody and do it by the sound. And I think that accounts for the kind of folk element in our family, is that she learned by ear and she taught us by ear. She just expected that of us. It wasn't a conscious decision. They didn't decide they were going to be folky and raise their kids that way. It was just,
right.
It fit the situation. This was how they sang. And so they sang to us that way. Were
there ever sessions, or was it really more of a matter of music for the occasion?
Music for the occasion. We had a series of cassette tapes and CDs that we would listen to over and over and over that were our favorites. And we'd sing along with them. And then with the piano lessons, then, we would learn the songs that we liked on piano and sing along. So it's really more the day in and out, not overly conscious, formal music environment.
And it expressed itself mostly in singing. So at what point did it, let's say you're singing folk songs that she learned as a child, at what point does one of you do any of you accompany on an instrument at any point, or is it really just all singing together?
Mostly just singing together. A few of us play piano. I don't. Cecilia plays piano, and our little sister plays harp. Our dad plays a little guitar. None of us, I would say, are hugely talented in the instrument realm. So mostly just voice. Lots and lots of singing. That's really what we all love the most and are best at, I would say.
Well, we didn't have instruments lying around. My dad had his guitar, but it was, with so many little kids in the house, he didn't pull it out much because inevitably the baby would come over and start smashing it. And so he really didn't start playing again until we were all adults.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the kind of environment that's awesome if you do have it, where there are just instruments lying around and you just pick them up and start fooling around with them, which is really, how you learn to play folk music instrumentally. We didn't have that. And honestly, we're all impatient people. Mm-hmm. And singing is very immediate and very convenient. And we all had an easy time with it. And you can have, 5 people are singing, you can have 4 harmonies going as well as the melody. And that was very rewarding and easy. So that was just kind of what we naturally gravitated toward.
This is really interesting because I guess there's a number of different models of, family music making. And one of those models would be it's a tradition that's handed down, a family of almost professional musicians, or at least, if not professional, then the musicians in that community. I'm thinking, you could name any number of cultures, but what's coming to mind right now is, musicians in South India, where they'll it's really just in the family. Like the entire line is a line of musicians and they're trained from childhood. And then there's things sort of in between that, but and what you're describing, but it sounds like what you're describing is much more kind of like I don't know how to say it, but definitely no sense of we are in the way of becoming professionals at some point or something like that. So I guess what I'm trying to find out is, at what point do you become conscious of this as like folk music, and this is something that we're into?
Good question. Late, I guess. College, I'll speak for myself. When I went to college, I was coming from this background of singing, and all of our friends, because they were often toted around in the extended van as well, all knew, these same basic songs we did. So I was used to a situation where people would sing together a lot, everybody, whether you were in the family or out. And when I went to college, that was not the case. There were musical people and not musical people. And that was very surprising to me and irritating because I didn't consider myself a musical person like that.
It was more of just a cultural approach. It was part of you, but it wasn't you weren't a musician. Music was just part of your life.
Yeah. So it really wasn't until I ran up against other people not being that way in college that I really realized that. And then right away in college decided I wanted other people to be comfortable with singing. And so started encouraging that whenever I could, and was lucky enough, I guess, that I was in a community where people were very willing to learn to sing. Everybody was. And so after 4 years, we did have a community of people who would sing together who weren't musicians, who were just singing these songs. So then after college, it became more clear to me that that was something you could spread to other people, that not everybody gets to sing together, but everybody can.
This is fascinating because, I was going into this thinking you had grown up in a musical family in the sense of, your brother's blazing on the mandolin and, you're getting together and having sessions all the time. And it's true that you grew up in a musical family, but you didn't perceive it in that way. You just perceived it as this is something that people do. And, you may have been aware of it as like a craft, as a skill that you developed to some extent, obviously. But it's really interesting that you said you didn't think of there being musical and not musical people.
I think that's kind of colored Emma's and my understanding of what folk music is.
Definitely.
That it's something anyone can make, and that's rewarding for anyone to make.
We go marching on the green grass, thus, thus, thus. Come all you pretty fair maids, come march along with us. So pretty and so fair as you take yourselves to be. I'll choose you for a partner, come march along with me. Well, I would not marry a blacksmith, he smuts his nose and chin. I'd rather marry a soldier boy who marches through the wind. A soldier boy, a soldier boy, a soldier boy for me. If ever I get married, a soldier's wife I'll be. Well, I would not marry a doctor, he's always killing the sick. I'd rather marry a soldier boy who marches double quick. A soldier boy, a soldier boy, a soldier boy for me. If ever I get married, a soldier's wife I'll be. Well, I would not marry a farmer, he's always selling grain. I'd rather marry a soldier boy who marches through the rain. A soldier boy, a soldier boy, a soldier boy for me. If ever I get married, a soldier's wife I'll be.
Did you grow up listening to recordings of folk music? Were you aware of like a scene of folk music or anything like that?
We certainly listened to it, aware of it as a genre. No, lots of Doc Watson, but it was pretty eclectic. We had Peter, Paul, and Mary, kind of, David Grisman, Jerry Garcia. We weren't thinking, and nobody talked in terms of genre. It was just we liked it or we didn't like it.
I feel, the folk as an entity really didn't come into our lives, I think, till college. So really aware that was not a category, because we knew that folk was a category of music, but it wasn't. We just didn't think about it. It's just the music that we liked and listened to.
Right. So that kind of answers my question too about like what tradition were you sort of taught, because it really was not like, oh, we play Appalachian music or something like that, or we grew up in an Irish music family or anything like that. You know, I guess a lot of it sounds like a lot of it was American, but of course that has, you know, deep roots beyond America for sure in many parts of the world, not just the English speaking world. So you become more aware of it in college because you're like, oh, we're not like everybody else. But not in a sense like you're the X-Men, but just more like, oh, you know, this is such a normal thing to us, and yet this is something that's missing from other people's lives. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you were becoming more aware of it in the course of your attempts to kind of like get other people used to this idea.
Yeah, there were other people in my class, for example, who were similar to me, who did grow up singing. And a couple professors. Mm-hmm. There were people there who shared that with me, which is partly why I thought anyone could be that way. But it was odd in college. I remember coming up against people, or just experiencing people who had grown up listening to Irish music, and that was their category of folk. Mm-hmm. And it came along, you've probably experienced this at some point, but it came along with a whole persona of the Irish Americana persona. So that was new to me, and we're not Irish, and that just wasn't part of what we did. But it was fascinating because as I kind of tried to teach people to sing, or it just came up more often, I would meet these people who knew a lot of music, but only Irish music that you sing a particular way, and that are about particular things. So to my mind, it wasn't really folk music because you could only sing it in certain situations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it wasn't as universal.
They would only have like wine, women, and women in fighting songs, not anything you could really sing while doing the dishes, or anything you could sing to your 5-year-old to keep them entertained.
Right. Mm-hmm. Of course, Irish music has those things, but I get what you're saying.
Not in their minds, or not what they have.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mention a persona, because, well, you know, I know what you're talking about, but it makes me want to ask, what kind of physical environment did you grow up in? I mean, did you grow up in the suburbs, or did you grow up in the country, or what?
Well, we grew up in a small town initially, and then, well, the older kids did, but I, being near the end, we moved when I was about 4 out to the country. Not super rural, but definitely farther away from grocery stores. And that definitely did play into our musical life, I guess.
I mean, you know, the reason I ask is because you were saying like what you came up with was not one single ethnic tradition or anything like that, and it wasn't based on any kind of professional musicianship. Uh-huh. And also it wasn't limited to a genre, really. And then you say it doesn't have this persona to it. So, you know, I was kind of curious about where you grew up, because it sounds like the main thing is just the experience of singing together. But there are certain types of songs that you can sing together, and certain types of songs that you can't really sing together, right, which is maybe something we can talk about.
Yeah, that's a great point, because music, there's just so many variables in music, right? The content of what you're singing, the actual words, what you're singing about, and the complexity of the music, how hard it is to sing. The rhythm, even the volume, you know, how loud or how quiet the song should be, all play in various ways. Because of the way we grew up, we were singing a lot of things that were approachable for everybody, every age, so that, the 5-year-old was amused and could maybe kind of sing along, but the 16-year-old wasn't bored out of her mind, which definitely lends itself more toward quick-paced, simple melodies, a lot of words, nonsense words, rounds.
Yeah. Well, and I would also say, too, not just within our family, but also within our community, with the families, our cousins, and all the close friends that we had growing up and still have, they similar musical culture, I guess, at some level. And same, you're still dealing with that broad range of ages with your friends and cousins as well. So it was just everything put together. The whole package really played into it and to what we were doing.
So in your community, it wasn't just like your mom and your carpool circle. It was something that was in your wider community?
Yeah, I would say so.
How does this happen?
Well, it was and it wasn't in our wider community. My mom was the singing mom, for sure. And hers was the singing van. Not everybody's was like that. Some of our friends, you'd go over and they'd be playing opera, on the CD player. And that was not what was happening at our house.
So the normal kids listened to opera. The normal kids were the ones who listened to opera. Let me just clarify that.
Okay, good to know. But, it was different. Each family had its own slightly different music. Like our cousins tended to listen more to like Jim Croce.
The old crooner sounds.
Yeah, which we didn't really do. But then because you're over at their house, we'd end up listening to it too. So there was definitely a culture of parents who shared moral standards, cultural standards, how they wanted their children to be raised, which meant that we weren't being exposed to, to music our parents didn't approve of at our friend's house. But our parents were certainly the most enthusiastic about singing and the most unself-conscious in getting it going.
Okay. So maybe we should take a step back and talk about, we've certainly laid some groundwork already, but what do you consider folk music to be?
Indefinable? No. So anything that you label with the label folk, there's an element of irony in there because something is considered a folk art when it's just what you do, what the people do, what is normal, shared, common, old. But as you've gotten more self-conscious about culture, that got labeled and named and said that it was different from professional music and different from sacred music. And, it got put into a category. So I guess we tend to use it very loosely because there are things we sing that are, certainly composed by modern people or not very old or not well known that we would still consider folk. And to us, the defining characteristic of folk is that it's singable by anybody. As long as you can carry a tune, you can sing it and enjoy singing it.
Yeah, anyone, any age.
And that so that's the music itself, but that the content in whatever way, either because it's silly or funny or heart-wrenching or inspiring or violent or whatever it is, the content is pretty universally appealing, either in its emotional clout or just in its appeal.
Have you ever been down the water spout to the very bottom of a water station? There you will find a baby alligator who goes by the name of Alfred and he's mine. I lost him, I threw him down the water spout, and now I'm feeling lonely 'cause he's gone. I miss him. Have you ever been down the water spout to the very bottom of a water station? There you will find a baby alligator who goes by the name of Alfred and he's mine. I lost him. I threw him down the water spout, and now I'm feeling lonely 'cause he's gone. I miss him. Have you ever been down the water spout to the very bottom of a water station? There you will find a baby alligator who goes by the name of Alfred and he's mine. I lost him. I threw him down the water spout, and now I'm feeling lonely 'cause he's gone. I miss him, I miss him.
It seems as though, you were talking about the difficulty of defining folk music, and you grew up in an interesting situation where it was natural to you to sing together as a family, but then you brought it to the wider world, and suddenly it didn't appear like something that everybody did. As you say, I think there's like an artificiality in making folk into kind of a genre category, and I think that our kind of weird social situation as modern people makes it difficult to not think of it in a way that's kind of artificial, because it's kind of like, we've lost, if I can make a parallel, we've lost our connection with our natural environment to a significant degree, certainly with the land. And then when you have movements of people trying to get back to that, it often strikes you as kind of like contrived and artificial, because it was never this like intentional thing to begin with.
Yeah. Even
it was just how people were. It was just the human condition, essentially.
right. And some of those things, like a lot of folk music is rooted in nature. And so, there's a nice walking beat is often present, or even in like Scottish boat songs, you can hear the
very lilting.
Yeah, the rowing rhythm. And there's a funny little clip of Doc Watson, very old, chatting like before he begins a song. He's in concert, and he mentions as he's about to start the song that he learned this song listening to his mother sing it while she churned the butter on the front porch, because it was a tiring, repetitive task, and to have a song keeping the beat for you was helpful. And it's kind of a long, repetitive song. So when you consciously going back and trying to sing folk music and be more connected with natural things, sometimes it is completely artificial, because we do not churn butter anymore. And well,
I don't know of any song that goes along.
and even the work that we still do is less natural, right? There's a machine usually, and you'd have to be singing over the machine, and the beat of the machine isn't a natural beat, so it's harder to sing too. So
right.
That artificiality partly is just the name of the game. Like you can't undo it or get around it.
Yeah. I definitely agree. So we also talked about melodies. We talked about, some of the things that are more conducive to group singing by, people who aren't professional musicians. One of the things you have these essays on your site about folk music and its kind of nature. One of the other things you say is it's participated in rather than consumed. And music has become definitely something that is consumed primarily now. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess. So I have to plead guilty here that I also consume music plenty.
We were listening to Doc Watson before we started this podcast.
So I don't think either of us would make the case that you shouldn't consume music, but
of course.
It is fairly analogous to food. There are some foods that you consume and enjoy greatly. Whatever, a piece of bread, it's delicious and fresh and it's great and you want more of it. And that's healthy and natural and normal and exactly what that food is made for. But then there's some food, like whatever, pop, that is good, it's delicious and you want more of it, but it's addictive and not really serving its proper end, which is nourishment. And music is,
Did you say pop? Okay, I was trying to figure out what you said, and then I was like, oh, right, pop. That's what they say. Yes. Okay. No, it's okay.
Yes. Soda.
It's okay. No, I know people from Wisconsin who say pop. I just kind of forgot about it until you said it.
So pretentious. No, I'm teasing. Oh, I know.
It's not pretentious. It's colloquial.
Anyway, and the music is similar in that some music can be consumed in a way that's just wonderful and it nourishes you, but some music is created to be addictive and not to nourish you, but to make you want more and more and more of it in the way that you want more and more
Right.
soda pop.
It's neither made to be, it's neither made to be participated in, nor is it made to be listened to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's made to be a background kind of noise and like a sort of vague sensory stimulation and kind of like an attitude, but there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting because with folk music, one of its greatest appeals, at least for us it seems, is that there's a song for every situation. And that is not so very different from having, a soundtrack to your life like most of the world does. You're always playing a song that suits your mood or creates the environment that you want. We all have coffee shop music, and you listen to certain kinds of music at a coffee shop. And that's a fine line, between those two things. But to us, I think the big difference is that with folk music, you are creating it in some way, or you're participating. You're like a co-creator in the music rather than just a passive consumer.
It's also very communal, like food. Making music together is so very much like having a good meal together. It brings you together in a way that just listening to pop songs doesn't. Well, I don't know that I can make that claim, but it doesn't in the same way, at least, that making music does together.
And of course, none of us are opposed to, professionally made music, obviously. But, one of the things that you mentioned, I think briefly, perhaps, and somewhere on your website, was that, folk music, this participation in music also does lay the groundwork to a certain extent for other types of musical experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just kind of it's like the workaday music. You use it, you create it, you have it in your daily life, but it's not necessarily the best kind of music, or certainly not the best kind of music for every situation. Right? It's not what you sing, what one should sing at Mass, because it's not usually very transcendent, and it's not noble in its very music. Like the music is workaday, simple melody, really, and that's not how you'd want to worship the Lord for the most part. Yeah.
Right, for the most part. It's interesting though. This makes me think of the hymn "Oh God, Beyond All Praising." So I've heard that a couple times recently because it was sung at ordinations I was at and things like that. But I always thought that was just a folk melody. But it was written by Gustav Holst. It was originally in the Jupiter piece from his suite, The Planets. And I was listening to that. I don't think I'd ever really listened to it all the way through before recently. And that melody came out. I was like, what? And then I looked it up, and yeah, it was written by him. And I thought that this melody had just kind of, emerged from the soil at some point. But it was written by a person, and yet it sounds, it both sounds like a folk song, and it sounds incredibly noble, which is interesting. It's interesting too because that's another thing that you touch on in your writings on your site is this idea that folk songs can be songs that are written by people whose names we know.
Yeah, and a lot of hymns are folk tunes. The words are different, but a lot of those base tunes come from folk music, which is so interesting.
Right, it can go both ways. Well, it can go both ways. Folk music can take composed music, as it were, and turn it into folk music. So I think the easiest example is Stephen Foster. I think most people have heard of his name.
Sure.
And often people will know some of the songs he wrote as Stephen Foster songs, like Camped on Races or, I Dream of Jeannie with the light brown hair, whatever. But people are very often surprised when they find out that Oh, Susanna is a Stephen Foster tune, because it's just one of those things, everybody knows it.
you learned it in Boy Scouts or something. It's just a song. It's a folk song. It's not any one person's song. And the tradition, the folk music tradition, whatever it is, and however it happens, it has this knack for just taking up some music and considering it folk.
Are folk songs usually about, in your experience, are they usually about a particular person? You know what I mean? At least not if it doesn't have to be a person who really existed. I mean, but like somebody's name or a specific place.
Oh, what an interesting question.
I wouldn't say usually.
Well, I'm just asking because I'm wondering if that could be contrasted to a lot of pop music, if certainly not all. But
Ooh. I would say definitely. It would depend really on the kind of song you're singing, and there tend to be like shticks in folk music. So boys who go away to war and are thought to be dead are usually called Jimmy and Johnny. Like who knows why, but they are. Or you'll have like almost like recurring characters that you recognize. Or Nancy. Why is it that sailors always fall in love with Nancy? I don't know, but she seems to be named Nancy all the time. So there's that kind of thing. But I think probably like you're getting at more, asking about more, and it does tend to be, folk music tends to be a little bit more universal, less, I don't want to say, less personal, less specific. Because it's personal. It's got the emotional part.
I would say it's more about general human being, about love in the broad sense, about adventure, about whatever you want to say. But it's you're kind of removed from it. You're speaking about it almost from a distant perspective a lot of the time. Whereas so often modern written music, pop or whatever is very, very, very personal about your specific breakup or about your, I don't even know. It's very personal about your specific situation that you went through. Whereas,
yeah, I see what you mean. It's just there's less detachment.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I don't know if you know the song Rock, Salt, and Nails. And I don't know the history. I don't know who wrote it or what. But it's sung from a man's perspective, and he's angry because his love in some way was untrue to him. And his not very noble sentiment is that if women were squirrels, he'd load up his shotgun with rocks, salt, and nails and shoot them. And so, yes, that sentiment is something that you could find in a number of pop songs, certainly lots of country songs, but
soda songs.
Oh my gosh. But the way that it's expressed, both the way that the words are said and the music itself in the folk song is very restrained. So you're actually, if you're listening to this song, it's a pretty little melody. You're a little bit shocked when you realize what the guy is saying. And with a pop song, at least in my experience, you usually don't really know what the person is saying other than the three words that get repeated a lot of times. But you're never left guessing as to the emotion you're supposed to be feeling.
No, because it's told.
Right. It's hitting you in the face, musically speaking. So there's just this element.
It's designed to manipulate to a certain extent.
Right, yeah. It's designed, I guess this goes back to the consumption thing, that it seems to me that pop music, and I mean this pretty literally, I feel that pop music is demanding a certain emotional response from me, whereas folk music is it's less concerned about my feelings and more concerned with just expressing whatever needs to be expressed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's more, the song is what it is, and you respond to it how you respond to it.
Oh, where have you been, Billy boy, Billy boy? Oh, where have you been, charming Billy? I have been to seek a wife, she's the joy of my life. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. Did she ask you to come in, Billy boy, Billy boy? Did she ask you to come in, charming Billy? Yes, she asked me to come in. There's a dimple in her chin. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. Did she sit for you a chair, Billy boy, Billy boy? Did she sit for you a chair, charming Billy? Yes, she set for me a chair. She's got ringlets in her hair. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. Can she bake a cherry pie, Billy boy, Billy boy? Can she bake a cherry pie, charming Billy? She can bake a cherry pie, quick as a cat can wink its eye. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. How old is she, Billy boy, Billy boy? How old is she, charming Billy? 3 times 6 and 4 times 7, 28 and 11. She's a young thing and cannot leave her mother. Yes, she's a young thing and cannot leave her mother.
You mentioned that song, and I haven't heard it, about the squirrels and the shotgun. But the song's folk music is neither always positive in its, in its content, in its lyrical content, nor is it always happy, and nor is it always even morally uplifting necessarily. But there's an aspect to it that is different, and I think you see this in at least like classic country songs as well. And a long time ago, I interviewed a country singer, and he talked about this, how like the way that a classic country singer describes getting drunk and having a drinking problem is different from the way that a pop singer sings about partying. It takes a different. There is kind of an ambivalence, I guess you could say. It's told about in a somewhat detached way, or in the case of country music, if not detached, then kind of ambivalent. Like this is not necessarily a good thing. I'm just saying this is my life situation.
Yeah, and that's one of the wonderful things about folk music is it treats listeners as adults. That you are expected to respond in the way that you think you should respond, and it's not dictated to you by the song. So many people think that folk music is scrubby clean and sweet and I don't know, with some sort of 40s morality always present. And really nothing can be farther from the truth. And some of the greatest, oldest, most beloved folk songs,
Clementine. Clementine is perfect.
are either
Millions of
Right.
right. The Shanty Boy are either just kind of gruesome or just over the top in poor taste, or like some of the great old British ones like Barbara Allen or good heavens, the one about I'm blanking on the name. There are many old English folk songs about a wife who is untrue to her husband, and it describes it in great detail in very poor taste, and everyone usually ends up either murdered or committing suicide, and that's the end of the song, right?
Yeah.
But the redeeming trait, so maybe you may or may not want to be singing that song or have it in your home or sing it as a lullaby to your 5-year-old, but it at least does you the respect of letting you you draw the moral from the song. It's not demanding that you think or feel a particular way about the story. It's just telling you the story.
It's funny that you mention, this expectation, at least in certain circles. I don't think this is probably the case in, mainstream folk circles, but certain circles seem to think that folk music is kind of like morally more wholesome in its lyrical content always than like pop music. Well, I went to Christendom College for a year, and there was this one professor who was a big advocate of folk music and barn dances and stuff, and he was a philosophy professor, and he at one point in one of his classes he said something like, the topic of all, the vast majority of rock songs is, I think he said, like anger, sex, or I forget what the third one was, but it wasn't good. And, I was just thinking about that the other day. It's hard to say that that's not true of a lot of other genres of music, including folk music. I mean, not necessarily the majority, but I have this album, or a couple tracks from this album by this folk singer, great folk singer. I don't know how to pronounce her name, so I'm not going to try, but it's Carla Shiaki or something. And she did an album that was all traditional weaving songs from all different cultures. I mean, some of the tunes are really great, but I've been listening to these two tunes for, a couple of years intermittently. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to them and I was like, wait a minute, this is like totally lascivious. Like this weaver is like going around seducing women, and like there's all sorts of double entendres in here. I was like, darn it, I can't listen to this song anymore. So, you're not really safe with folk music either.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just it, is you're not safe with anything. That's just not a helpful way to look at the world. Yes, songs are like people. There are good ones and not as good ones, and you need to evaluate them on their own terms and decide what you think about them. And thinking in terms of genre, which we've gotten so used to doing, we can fall into this trap of like there are safe genres and not safe genres, or good ones and bad ones, which to some degree is true, but never completely true.
Sure. But I do think what you say about, the way that the human condition is described in a lot of folk songs, like a murder ballad or something like that, is done in a way that's not like necessarily trying to put you in that guy's frame of mind in such a sense that it like is making you similar to him. I mean, you are supposed to empathize with him, but it's not like you're made angry, or it's not turning you into a killer or something. I don't know.
Right.
So there is a different kind of worldly wise. It's like the voice of experience. Looking at it's putting you into those events in the past tense instead of the present tense of the person who's committing the murder. It's like the guy who's about to be hanged, looking back on his choices.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's true even when you sing it. There's a beautiful song, I don't know if you know it, but Omi Wise, Little Omi Wise. And it was written in response to a true story, or a historical event where this man somewhere in the deep south seduced this girl, Omi, and then murdered her. And the whole community suspected this man of being the murderer, but couldn't prove it. And he escaped. They put him on trial, but they couldn't prove it. And he escaped and went and lived his life somewhere else. And this song was written in response to that, as the community's like judgment of him, because in the song he is convicted and hung. And it's this really interesting. So there's that historical level to it. But even if you didn't know that background to the story, when you sing the song, it walks you through the whole story. Omi being seduced by this man and being a fool, as it says in the song, and then he drowns her. It's all very graphic, and it's quoting them, it's very direct, but somehow with this level of detachment, so you don't feel like you're victim, you don't feel like Omi being victimized, and you don't feel murderous thoughts like the murderer either. You feel like a member of the community who's just watched it happen. And I feel that tends to be the folk attitude toward these things, that you're just sort of watching.
Wow. So it's like, yeah, that's fascinating. It makes sense too, because that's, these are songs that are passed down in the community, and it's a story essentially. It's not a self-expression exactly in the same way as that like a pop song is considered to be.
There was a frog lived in the spring. Sing song kitty kitty cameo. He was so hoarse he could not sing. Sing song kitty kitty cameo. Kimo camo where oh where him hiding comes out singing sing song Pennywhistle ding tong nippy and a sing song kitty kitty cameo. I grabbed that frog and pulled him out. Sing song kitty kitty cameo. He hopped and he skipped and he danced all about. Sing song kitty kitty cameo. Kimo camo where oh where him hiding comes out singing sing song Pennywhistle ding tong nippy and a sing song kitty kitty cameo. Way down south by Possum Creek, sing song kitty get your cameo. The lassies grow to be 10 feet. Sing song kitty get your cameo. Kimo camo where oh where him hiding comes out singing sing song Penny whistle ding dong
So we should probably talk about your album now. So you have your first album as Roundabout, Singsong Pennywhistle. It's an album of classic folk songs for children. So, did you ever envision going into a studio at some point? How did that happen?
Well, it happened because, so short answer, no, we didn't envision that. Long answer, yes, I guess. I have done a couple CD recordings in the past with some girls that I sang with in high school at our parish and loved it. And I've always loved to sing. And I guess at some level, deep down, I did want to do another recording of folk music. But it wasn't something that I guess I ever really consciously thought about until one day I decided that I was tired of not doing enough with my voice and I wanted to record an album, even though I didn't really think about what that would look like or what would be on it or really anything about it. I just decided that I wanted to do it. And so I approached Cecilia and said, would you want to do this with me? And I thought for sure, being my older sister, she would say, no, you're crazy. She didn't say that. She said yes right away, really enthusiastically. And we started writing down song ideas right then and there, literally minutes later. So that's kind of how it came about. But then in discussing it, we got more and more excited about it. And we've always thought that there's a lack of good children's music specifically. So we, growing up, felt that there was a dearth of children's music, good children's music. There's just not very much out there. There's We Sing, which makes the parents want to weep. And it's just, there's not enough good children's music out there. So we've always felt that way. And about that way about folk in general as well, because though there's a lot of folk recordings out there, they're all sung particularly well, or at least in the way that the style that we like. So once we started brainstorming and talking about it, we were getting more and more excited and realizing, oh, this is really fun. Actually, we want to do this a lot. And we want to make lots of albums if we can. So that's kind of how we got off our feet, got started. And it's been super fun ever since.
Yeah. So how did you get in touch with this guitarist that you've worked with?
Yeah, so we knew Ben David through some of his family members live in our area, and we are friends with them. And they had a caroling party one Christmas a number of years ago, and he was in town for Christmas break, and so we met him at that party. We just had so much fun singing together with him and the rest of his family. And they have kind of a similar musical family culture that we had growing up, or at least it was similar in the sense that we just felt it was very easy and natural and comfortable singing with them. And so we really asked him, we didn't know him that well, but we asked him out of the blue if he would do it with us, and he was enthusiastic and totally willing to do it. So he came up from Virginia where he lives and did it with us in a super crammed but fun weekend.
It's great too. Ben David is a professional musician in his own right, so he brought a lot of experience.
Invaluable experience.
Yeah.
Did he already kind of know all these tunes, or did he have to come up with arrangements sort of on the spot or improvise?
We really had to come up with them. We sent him what general bad recordings we could find of them online for him to get a rough idea of what he was, how we wanted it to sound or the tune. But really, he had to just completely make up the accompaniment, and he did a great job. We just love what he did, matching the accompaniment to the style of the songs. He really nailed it.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there's a variety of kind of rhythms and textures that he puts together.
Yeah, we would just sing that first right. We just kind of sing the song and you start to play and fiddle around with it, take some notes.
Well, I'm a fan of criticizing the media that's created for children. So maybe one way to interest people in this album and give them a sense of kind of the ethos that you approached it with is like, what specifically don't you like about a lot of children's music, and how did you approach things differently? Because I've always been kind of skeptical of the whole idea of children's music myself.
Well, I will answer that first. There are lots of things that we don't like about it, but I would say one of the things is that, well, they dumb it down. They make it sound kind of silly and cutesy rather than just singing it for what it is. It's always goofy. They don't take it seriously. Not to say that you can't sing music lightheartedly, but just so over the top. And
They put too much stink on it.
yeah, oh yeah. And I don't like, this is going to sound pretty terrible, but I'm not a huge fan of when they have children singing along on a recording. I love having children sing along in real life. It's wonderful, but on a recording, it can be hard to listen to. It adds chaos.
Sure.
I'm a school teacher by trade and spend a lot of time around children, 10-year-olds. And I guess kids are people too, and they don't need to be talked down to. And what's pleasing to an adult's ear is pleasing to a child's ear, or should be. So, I don't know, just if you've encountered, not to name any names, common children's music artists, they'll have, YouTube videos with giant stuffed animals dancing around singing
Bunny ears.
These beautiful old tunes in this horrible, dumbed down, weird voice.
Loud, tasteless.
Yeah, simplified rhythms. Another thing that we really wanted to avoid was kind of cleaning up the lyrics, making them more suitable for children, or more easily understood by children. That's just...
Children deserve more than Baby Shark.
Yes. And a lot of real artists don't spend any time recording music for children because it's just not really on their radar. It makes a lot of sense. But there are a lot of families in our community, and these families want music for their children and are having a hard time finding it. So it seemed
desired.
Yeah, like people wanted it. I think also, just kind of building off what I said about my experience in college, and I think Emma had a similar one, of teaching other people to sing, that was part of our desire to record. Certainly, that was more my motivation to record, is that if you can get people singing when they're children, they'll think it's think it's normal, and they'll be less self-conscious about it as they grow up, and will share it more easily as they become adults. And so this CD, hopefully, I mean, the intent wasn't that it's just consumed, but that the children learn the songs, and the moms and the dads learn the songs as they listen to it, and then sing them themselves. That was kind of the idea.
Yeah, to get people singing. So we were filling a void, or so we thought, a void of good children's music, but also just encouraging people to sing and to actually sing, not to just bop along to whatever is the biggest hit, but to actually sing words and tell a story all the time. Not in, it doesn't have to be in this stiff situation. It can be just as you're in the shower. It really is just sing.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree with everything you've said about children's music. Yeah, there's something, again, get away from the artificiality of it, and have it be something that's just like a full human experience that appeals to everybody of lots of different ages. And what you said about the lyrics too. Yeah, I mean, there's figures of speech in there that are not current, and it makes me happy to think of a child learning that figure of speech. You know what I mean? I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I think of the we were talking about folk songs with slightly darker lyrical themes. I think there's not a lot of that on the album, but one that I can think of would be the song "The Miller's Will." Can you talk about that one a little bit?
So, yeah, this is a song that got on the CD just because it's rascally. The sense of humor behind it is wonderful. So the story, for those who don't know the song, There's an old miller. He's on his deathbed. He has 3 sons, and he invites them in, or to his bedside one by one, and asks asks each son what he'll charge the customers at the mill. And the first son gives a very reasonable response, a certain amount of the grain that they bring to the mill. And the father dismisses him and says, with such a living, you'll never get ahead. Just, oh my gosh, he can't believe what a terrible idea that was. So he calls in his second son, same question. The second son says he'll take half of the grain that's brought. And the father says, you'll never get a bride, sends him away. And the youngest son comes in and says he'll take all of the grain that's brought in. And the father exclaims hallelujah and dies. And then the last verse is this great little side comment to the singer that they buried the miller in a little box grave. And then it says, some do not think his soul was saved. Where he went, I cannot say, but I rather believe he went the other way. Right? So it's this little sly commentary on the miller's view of life. And although it's dealing with serious things, avarice and bad business and death, it's all said with this kind of straight-faced humor that a child might not pick up on as a young child, but as they grow up, they'll realize, hey, this is funny, and they'll get the joke, as well as just the moral.
There was an old miller who lived all alone. He had 3 sons all fully grown. When the time came to make out his will, all he had left was a bitty grist mill, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. He called to him his eldest son, said, son, oh son, my race is run. If I'm miller of your make, pray tell me what toll you'll take, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. Father, oh father, my name is Bill. Out of each bushel I'll take a gill. Not enough, the old man said. For such a living you'll never get ahead, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. He called him his second son, said, son, oh son, my race is run. If I'm miller of your make, pray tell me what toll you'll take, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. Father, oh father, my name is Ralph. Out of each bushel I'll take half. You fool, the old man cried. For such a living you'll never get a bride, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. He called him his youngest son, said, son, oh son, my race is run. If I'm miller of your make, pray tell me what toll you'll take, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. Father, oh father, my name is Paul. Out of each bushel I'll take all. Hallelujah, the old man cried. And then he turned up his toes and he died, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day. They buried him in a little box grave. Some do not think his soul was safe. Where he went I cannot say, but I rather believe he went the other way, singing fall dicky day, oh fall dicky day.
I think it's really important that children learn, this age-old lesson that has been passed down in folk music, which is that you can't trust millers. Millers are dishonest, and they always are on the take, and they're skimming a little bit off the top. This is a perennial theme in folk music, and I don't think it should be lost. I think we should have our kids on guard always.
It's true. They have to learn. It's just good life skills. Who to trust and who not to trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a great recording we listened to as children by the unlikely duo of Jerry Garcia and David Grisman.
And it's called Not for Kids Only.
And it's children's music. And we listened to it for as long as I can remember, a lot.
And
in my mind, it's this great example of what children's music should be, because it's truly not for kids only. The two artists, I mean, they're so good at what they do. The artistry is so amazing.
You don't realize it's for children if you're just overhearing it.
Yeah, and that we loved it as children. It's kind of, it's upbeat for the most part, and there are very funny songs on there, just, you know, kind of goofy patter songs. But as an adult, you can hear those same songs, and there's all sorts of kind of sly commentary in there. Just wonderful sense of humor that a child wouldn't necessarily notice or wouldn't think was particularly funny. But as you get older, you can realize there are these other layers to the music. So that's something we were hoping to do, not quite in such a comical way as that particular recording, but just that if you're, you know, a 35-year-old parent listening to the CD, you still have something interesting that you're listening to. There are layers there to unpack.
So it's a great CD. I've been really enjoying listening to it the past couple weeks. There's like a kind of a stripped down simplicity to it, just the two voices and the guitar, and the kind of very clear, simple, classic folk singing that you both do. I really like. There's a certain purity to folk music where, you know, it doesn't need to be adorned over much. You know what I mean?
We definitely agree with that. I mean, that was really kind of the goal that we were reaching for too in recording it, is that we wanted it to be that very simple sound so that people could just listen to it and enjoy it and not be distracted by anything that's going around in the background or really crazy vocal exercises. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But yes, absolutely. It's so simple. That's part of the beauty of it.
We also tried to kind of let the song speak for itself. So obviously you have to suit your technique to the song, but to some degree, but we tried to keep that minimal. So, you know, if it's a sillier song, to try and kind of sing it straight so that
you're not being overwhelmed.
Right. With personality or with, you know, a certain mood, that it's just, here's the song, take it as you will. We also, the kind of straight vocal style, we're hoping that it's more accessible. So because we want other people singing, we wanted to keep our singing very straightforward and stripped down, because we don't want people listening to the CD thinking, I could never do that, you know, the way you would when you're listening to,
right,
you know, an opera recording. Just, you know, your amazement at the vocal technique creates this like barrier for you to try and do it yourself. And that's not at all what we wanted. We wanted it to sound like they're just, you know, we're all sitting on your couch singing.
Yeah.
Nor do you want people to be learning your version of the song, like they're transcribing your phrasing or something like that. You want them to be learning the song and then sing it as they themselves are going to sing it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So how have people responded to it? It's been a while since it came out, right?
Yeah, it's been about, I don't know, half a year or so. Amazingly positive. We have been blown away, actually, by how people have responded to it. They've been really excited and have been pushing us to make another one, which is really sweet. That's really all there is to say. People have just been so excited.
One of our favorite things is we've had a couple families write us letters. So the children have written to us, commenting on the CD or thanking us for the CD.
Drawing pictures of the Mermaid of Ontario.
And it's all different ages. But one of my favorite things so far is one little boy. He's too little to write himself. So it's his mother writing down what he was clearly dictating to her. And his letter to us is basically just a story that one time he was in his little sister's bedroom with his brother, and they started singing one of our songs, and it was so funny.
It was the Miller.
It might have been the Miller song. But all that he wanted to tell us was that he was singing the song, and it was so funny. And that's exactly what we want, is the children singing the songs together. So that, I think, has been the best feedback we could have gotten.
That and video clips of that.
Yeah, that's very gratifying. Have you been playing out at all? I mean, I know this guitarist, he lives in Virginia. It's not very close to you, but have you, since the release of this album, have you been doing any more? I mean, have you been gigging at all, or are you pretty much just living your lives and seeing if you're going to do another one eventually?
Pretty much the latter. We both work, and it's hard, as I'm sure many other people know. It's hard to be a professional musician, performing musician, and work a full-time profession. So that, just the time element combined with Ben David being far away, we haven't done anything. People have been asking us to, and we're open to it, but at this point, it just isn't practical.
We're not going to be going on tour. It'd be fun.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I just said we're not going to go on tour. It would be fun to do a little, little gigs around town if the opportunity arises, but we'll take it as it comes, see what happens. We also wanted to, when we were talking about doing this recording, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping the focus on the music itself. So the intent wasn't for us to become recording artists. The intent was for people to sing and for us to get people singing. So though it would be so fun to do little concerts here and there, and we might end up doing that, that's not what our main focus is going to be, because we're not trying to draw the attention back to us. We're trying to promote the music itself now, but we also realize that sometimes that means, doing little concerts, and that's enjoyable. So we'll see what ends up happening, but that was another element of our motives behind recording the CD.
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a very humble attitude, and I think, more musicians ought to think that way.
Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. You shall have a fishy, you shall have a fin. You shall have a codling when the boat comes in. You shall have a haddock broiled in a pan. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. When you are a young man, go into the trades. Find yourself a skill and wages you'll be paid. Then with all your wages, buy yourself some land. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. When you are a man and fit to take a wife, you shall meet a lass and love her all your life. She shall be your wife and you shall be her man. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. When you are an old man, father to a son, sing to him the old song, sing of all you've done. Pass along the old ways, let his song begin. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man. Dance to your daddy, my little laddie. Dance to your daddy, my little man.
So I would be remiss if I concluded this interview without asking, you're both Catholic. How has your Catholicism shaped your understanding of folk music, and also vice versa? And of course, this as to this project in particular, if there was any interplay there.
Well, I would say it played into it in the way that you would want your faith to play into anything in your life, and that being everything in your life. So I would say that though there wasn't any explicit God moment or whatever people call it, just our faith kind of takes a role, or should take a role, in every area of our lives. And so that just, I don't know, it just kind of goes hand in hand. I can't think of any specific example. I guess you could say we did invoke the St. Nicholas and St. Cecilia to help us. But yeah, it's just kind of general faith life. I don't know about you, Cecilia.
Yeah, not really more specific, more general. As a Catholic, like the world, everything is sacramental. Like everything, there's an imprint of God in some way, so nothing is left untouched by your faith. And you're kind of fooling yourself if you try and live your life without understanding that God is involved in all of it. Like grace builds on nature, and when you're singing, that's even true, that if you have just kind of a natural, healthy, fun, communal singing culture of just folk music, then the singing that you do in moments of, liturgical worship or just moments of more profound faith, there's a richness there, that there are layers that singing helps, it helps unpack for you, that they're just, you never worship God in just one way, but in a whole myriad of ways. You worship him by going to mass, but you also worship him by doing your dishes. And I feel that way about singing too, that you worship him, sure, by singing liturgically, but you also worship him by singing your little folk ballads around the house. And so both are important. When you try and pass on the faith to others, to children, you want to give them the full richness of experience, and folk music is part of that.
Yeah, because you can't, restore all things in Christ if you're, living as 35% of a human being.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is obviously, what you've described here is obviously a fundamental part of the human experience that, most people haven't even had to think about. But it's just that we're in a peculiar, fragmented modern situation that we have to be a little more active in pursuing these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Emma and Cecilia, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope to hear from you again if you put another album out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It was a pleasure.